Now, what's interesting there is that because the CIA or whoever was doing it had superior technology, the terrorists had no way of knowing that they were being watched. And if the terrorists say, well, that's not fair, you should have let us know and you were listening. No, because it was not at all in the interest of the American intelligence services to give them that information. So then the question would be, assuming that I do a commercial now, everything I drink I should actually endorse and get paid for it. Like, if I say that I like this tea, then whoever makes this tea should pay me. When I give classes in temples, I'm thinking of selling advertising space in my quartet, right? And like in the Tour de France. So actually, unfortunately, to get a PhD in science, you don't have to take a philosophy class, unfortunately, and you certainly don't have to take an epistemology class. Epistemology is the philosophy of knowing, under what conditions can you say that you really know something?
Yes.
And so basically you have these scientists who are sort of philosophically brain dead, and they don't know what they're talking about, and they make they may be good scientists, but when they then, let's say you do a scientific investigation, but then in order to make a claim about what you've proved, you have to bring your data into the neutral realm of philosophical discussion, and then you have to, because you can say, for example, take the case of evolution. So the fossil record, you see that book, Forbidden Archaeology? Actually, I visited them when they were working on that in San Diego. I used to visit stuff like that. So, in general, the fossil record shows that older organisms tend to be simpler and newer ones tend to be more complex.
Right,
but there are many anomalies. And so you have a general tendency with many anomalies. But, so what science actually knows is that there's a fossil record. That's what they know. Now, how did that happen? Have you seen Svabuta's book, Mechanistic and Non-Mechanistic Science?
I haven't read it.
That's an amazing book. That's basically like the information theory argument, saying that because living organisms are so like ridiculously complex, they now found like little engines, little motors and cells, and so it's so incredibly complex that the chances of it arising spontaneously with no intelligent guidance are like almost infinitely low. It's like when you see something, an object, the more complex it is, the less likely it occurs by chance. So, like for example, let's say you walking through the woods and you see a bunch of twigs sort of randomly fall on the ground. There's nothing to indicate that there's intelligence behind it. But if you are walking through the same woods and you see a bunch of twigs that spill out, let's say like a Shakespeare sonnet or something like that, the chance of that randomly occurring is stupidly low. And that wouldn't be your first guess.
Or I think also like one argument that he made was that like even if you say that you can get to it, the problem is that there's no way to get from the point A to point B because it only works if you have everything there. Like you can't have any point in between because then it's missing some piece and the whole thing is just like is broken down. So like you have to get directly, like you can't make it in a continuous fashion. You have to get everything at once, so like all the motor pieces at once.
Yeah, there's a lot of studies that have been done like this. And so if an atheistic or agnostic scientist says that it may not be likely, but it's not impossible, but then the question is, if you are dealing with something like, let's say, a human body or even a bird's body or E. coli or whatever, then, and you don't know because you weren't there and you didn't observe it, you don't know how that came to exist, why would your first guess, or why would your main theory be something that's so unlikely? Even if you say that there is a finite probability, even if the probability is just insanely low, but still it's not impossible.
Yeah.
But why would you choose that as an explanation? Why would you choose something which is so unlikely? If you're just looking for the best possible explanation, and if by analogy to the world we do know, we see that all the complex things in the world for which we know the history. Like, for example, I have a computer, so we know the history of that computer. We know it was built in the sweatshop in a third world country, where the Apple Corporation is exploiting child labor. Anyway, just kidding. So, but if you take an Apple computer, then, or the flat screen TV, or your sweatshirt, we know the history. We know where it came from, and we know that it was designed by thinking creatures. So if you say that in the case of a living organism, we don't know the origin because we weren't there, and so you say, okay, well let's maybe proceed through analogy. What about all the complex things in the world for which we do know the origin? In every case, someone designed it. Is there one example of a... You can just close that if you want, make it easier for the computer. Just, no, the top. Yeah, just push it.
I put the keyboard inside of it.
Oh, yeah, you can just put it. If there's not a single case where we know by observation that a very complex thing arose without intelligent intervention. Is there one? Can you think of one very complex object where we know the history of it and we know that it came about without intelligent guidance? And yet we have literally billions of examples of complex things that we know were designed. So if you have something where you don't know, why wouldn't you create an analogy with what you do know? Because generally you analogize from the known to the unknown. So the fact that they say, well, our best guess is it came about by chance, that's really your best guess? That shows that their intention is not rational, it's political.
Or they have like an assumption that they're not willing to break.
Well, because it's political, because they want power and they want to...
So,
yes.
May I interrupt?
Yeah, of course.
I want to say something about that.
Yes.
And please feel free to stop me or correct me at any point. I'm here to submissively hear and learn from you.
No, we're here to talk, discuss.
So I may say a lot of wrong or stupid things.
Oh no, go jump in.
And I totally respect your thoughts way above mine. So, with that, having said that, the problem with the existence of God,
right,
as the creator has been that then you have to believe in the creator, the watchmaker, so to say. And
actually, you said you invited me to jump in.
Sure.
I would say that we're getting ahead of ourselves there. And
Okay,
this
I'll wait.
Yeah, and this no, but what in this sense, but what you said is sort of what you're not agnostic, but what many agnostics will say, and the flaw in that line of reasoning is that they're getting ahead. For example, I didn't mention God, and for the purpose of, let's say, the discussion we're having, God is irrelevant. We're just talking about intelligent design.
Sure, absolutely. Right. Intelligent design, and therefore you need a designer.
Right, a designer, as far as, and also I didn't claim there is one. You see, if you go back and see what I've actually said, I'm proceeding carefully.
Okay.
And so I didn't claim intelligent design. I simply said that some type of intelligent design theory is most analogous to what we already know about the world.
Okay, I agree.
Yeah, that's a logical truth.
Yes.
And whether there is an intelligent designer, or whether I believe in an intelligent designer, is actually irrelevant to the simple fact that intelligent design theory is much more consistent with what we know about the world. Assuming that we don't know, where almost infinitely complex structures came from, like human bodies.
I'm totally with you.
Yeah.
So far.
Yeah. So I've made that claim that we have an almost infinitely stronger analogy to complex objects for which the history is known. And so therefore I raised a simple question. Why would a so-called scientist who obviously knows virtually nothing about philosophy, why would a so-called philosopher choose as the theory to go with for now something which is so disanalogous to what we do know? Again, there's part of the world that we know. We know the history of manufactured objects. And then there's a part of the world we don't know, namely the history of living organisms. So why would you simply trash the analogy and say the analogy means nothing and we're going to go with a theory which is ridiculously improbable? So here in a sense we're dealing in the realm of psychology, not physics or paleontology. We're really talking about psychology here. What would lead a person to choose something which is almost infinitely disanalogous to what we know about the world, and something which is mathematically so improbable? Why would they choose that theory? I think clearly the explanation is not philosophical, because there is no philosophical reason for it. I think the reason is psychological.
And may I offer?
Yeah, sure.
And there's nothing new here, so no surprises, but my understanding is that, again, to fast forward the discussion a little, this argument will soon lead to a designer, or at least in the past history, it has led to a designer who happens to be God, and in the name of God, the so-called protectors of, the rabbis and the priests and the whoever else have committed a lot of atrocities and
I would.
And that's where.
Okay, I think we have a problem there in the reasoning. Because, first of all, there's no history of, or maybe not no, but there's very little history of atrocities committed by rabbis, for the simple reason that the Old Testament does contain some pretty awful stories about the ancient people in Israel that became the Jews, persecuting non-Jews. However, the rabbinical tradition, the tradition of rabbis, arose after the destruction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem by the Roman Empire, and since the time of the rabbis, it's just a word thing, because so it's not the rabbis actually.
Sure, I take that back. I mean,
and that was thousands of years ago. But again.
Yeah, I meant like the
if you want to talk about Christian history.
Yeah, I want to talk about times of Copernicus and Galileo.
No, you don't. You can go back farther than that. I mean, you've hit a gold mine. If you want atrocities, when you're talking about the church, you've hit the gold mine.
Yeah, so that's when the Renaissance and the Newtonian
and of course
revolution was. We don't want to take anything based on the word of somebody or some old scriptures. We want to empirically conclude everything with the power of prediction. Very clear prediction.
However, okay, but
that's where I think that's the core aspect of science.
Okay, there's a lot to say in reply.
Okay.
First of all, although scientists will never ever let us forget that Galileo was put on trial, the actual fact is that Galileo was, I think, remarkably obnoxious. And one of the reasons he was put on trial is because he was a real jerk about the way he proceeded. I mean, that's what I've heard from a lot of historians. But also, I mean, so let's just say it's true, though, that actually, you see, but the point I would make is that the church, not saints, but the church, tried to stop science for the same reason that science tries to stop religious ideas in universities, and that is because
that comes later. That's
no,
clearly
no,
there was no science.
no,
So to say before that. The
science. No, but that's not my point. My point is that basically what human history shows is whoever had power wants to keep their power and tries to suppress people who threaten their power. And so whether it's a church, whether it's a secular university, whether it's a military, whether it's, whoever it may be, it's a human characteristic. It's not a religious characteristic. The first truly secular century, in a sense, was the 20th century, and more people were massacred in the 20th century than any other previous century. So when we replace religious ideologies with humanistic and materialistic ideologies, the violence got worse, not better. But apart from that, and also if you look at, actually, you could make the argument that religious terrorism or religious abuses, I would say you could make a broad argument that it emanated from the Middle East in the following sense. If you look at the great world religions, and I mean great here in the sense of great influence on history, they only come from two places. What?
Middle East and India.
Yeah.
Abrahamic and Eastern.
Yeah, and Eastern. And what you find is that in India and in the Greco-Roman classical world, the pagans, go pagans, they didn't have religious wars. India didn't, in general. There's always an exception, like some out of control, crazy Raja somewhere. But in general, Hindus, or you could say the Vedic people, did not fight religious wars, and neither did the Greeks the Romans didn't either.
Yeah, you made a very good point in one of your lectures.
Yeah.
I
The very fact that Buddhism was able to gain so much prominence
in
India among the Vedic society itself is a testament to the fact that how much tolerance there was.
Yeah. So, if you want to talk about atrocities, basically, Hitler, for example, Hitler was a big fan of Darwin. Hitler was a big fan of Darwin. So Hitler was a Darwinist. Because he thought...
Oh, because like there's like you can use evolution to have racist.
Of course, because survival of the fittest. Obviously, big blonde Teutonic Germans, of which Hitler wasn't one, but you could say that it's just survival of the fittest.
So it's okay in the name of...
It's natural selection.
Yeah.
It's the law that it's natural selection. That Hitler thought that in trying to, in his genocide project...
Yeah, he was
sanctioned by Darwin. So
he was carrying out the Darwinian project. He was improving the human race.
Yep.
So... And also the fact that someone if for example, let's say some criminal breaks into a hospital, steals a surgeon's knife, and kills someone. The conclusion is we should take knives away from surgeons. So the fact that someone misuses something is not an argument that that same object should not be used properly.
Right. That's I guess like the reason why it's so anti-religious. Is that the reason why the whole sentiment is very anti-religious in the science community?
Well, this is exactly what we are here to try and understand.
It's anti-religious.
Sure, we can't understand in 2 hours, but
no, you can understand in 3 minutes. Okay. It's anti-religious because there was a culture war that the scientists won. You see, if you look at the universities, European universities, there was no America then. If you look at the European universities, even after Newton, even decades after Newton, some of the best universities in Europe were teaching Ptolemaic astronomy. Ptolemy going back, which was geocentric, and epicycles and all that. And so the universities were controlled by the church, and certain kinds of valid knowledge certain kinds of valid knowledge were excluded, irrationally excluded. And so what happened is the scientists or the rationalists, the agnostics, kind of gained power. They took over the universities, and now they're returning the favor. Now they are irrationally excluding spiritual knowledge. And so to me, both sides are kind of dumb. I mean, to me, what we're seeing is fanatical religion, and then fanatical, not science, scientism. It's a different word. Scientism means sort of someone who's fanatical about empirical science and irrational about it.
So what happens when you...
Well, what happens is...
What happens when you inject, again, I may fast forward, inject God into science, you lose the power of prediction.
But no one's suggesting that. Who's suggesting that?
Well,
I'm not suggesting that.
If you go back all the way and question who created the organisms, and in origins, there are origins of two things, origins of living beings and origins of the universe.
But if there's a God, that has nothing to do with biology. In the sense that when Krishna says, Mayadhyakshena, that I create the world or I make nature work, if you do, let's say, microbiology, and you discover all kinds of things, we can just say, okay, that's how God did it. From my point of view, you see, the problem was that in the Christian world back then, that was losing power, certainly academic power, they had foolishly committed themselves to very specific theories of cosmogony, which means the origin of the universe. I mean, or just, how life comes about and all that. They'd committed themselves to wrong theories, like a geocentric universe. And therefore, I mean, there's nothing, let's say everything ever discovered in microbiology is true. Jesus still could save you from your sins. I mean, one thing has nothing to do with the other. And so the problem is, well, of course, I'm not a Christian, obviously, but the problem is that the problem on both sides, in the case of the church, they wanted to, they invaded the legitimate territory of science. In other words, there is a legitimate area in which, for example, if I'm sick, I go to a doctor, I don't go to a priest. I mean, pray for me. I really appreciate it, but I'm still going to a doctor. And so, it's like everyone has their own legitimate area. For example, you have your house. That's your house. Your neighbor can't barge into your house. That's your house. He has to respect your boundaries. So in the same way, there are legitimate boundaries. Science, I'm not anti-science. I'm pro-science. I like science. I like legitimate science. They just have to not invade other people's areas. When I want to know how to, get over some medical issue, or if I want to get a better computer, I'm not going to go ask a Brahmin priest or something. I want someone that knows about computers or knows about medicine. So the problem is that on both sides, not so much now, because even the Catholic Church accepts the science of evolution, all that. So also there's this caricature of religion. It's like Prabhupada said, give the dog a bad name and hang him. And so when in these kinds of discussions, science and religion, when you talk about religion, you always take the worst religion. Rather than looking at the thousands and thousands of religious leaders in the Western world who actually, are pro-science and accept a lot of what science does, you take the stupidest, backward young earthers, the creationists, and so that's called in philosophy. That's called a straw man argument. There's a principle in debate where you have to defeat the strongest argument on the other side, not the weakest. And science chronically takes the weakest manifestation of the most irrational kind of religion and says that's religion.
That's correct. And I would like to hear your thoughts, and I would like to restrict to Vedic religion or Vedic understanding, where we luckily I was having a discussion with a Christian person, this kind of a good friend. I was telling him, luckily we don't have the problem of fossils dating back more than 4004 BC. We go back a few billion or trillion years, starting with the day of Brahma or the life of Brahma. So restricting ourselves purely to even the Vedic view, like Prabhupada said, to construct the temple Vedic planetarium to show how the universe is structured, that the origin is Brahma creates the universe upon instructions of Krishna, or Krishna, the first created being was Brahma, the descending process, not the ascending process from the amoeba all the way to higher evolved intelligence.
But they're not necessarily contradictory. They're not incompatible. They're not incompatible. Because, for example, obviously your parents begot you. And you started out as a little baby, and then you grew, you evolved within this life. But still, because your parents were intelligent, they gave you intelligent genes, and therefore you're biologically human. And so it's a descending process. And two intelligent creatures gave birth to you. Still, even though ultimately you were born because of intelligent design of your parents, still, once you were born, you evolved. So you can have a system where Krishna, Brahma collaborate, they create, but the way they create is by planting seeds and letting them grow through time, through, you could say, through, evolutionary time. In fact, Krishna says in the Gita, Bijam Hum, that I'm the unperishing seed. Krishna uses the word seed actually many times in the Gita. And so, for example, let's say you're a builder, you want to build a house. Let's say you're going to build your own house. So clearly it's intelligent design. You work out, or let's just say you're not going to build it, that's unrealistic. Let's say you're going to have a house built. So you hire an architect, you need an engineer, you get all these intelligent people, and they come up with a design. Now clearly it's being intelligently designed, the house. But once you come up with a design, if you look at how houses are actually built, they start out very simple. You lay a foundation, you dig a hole, you put some cement in. It's very simple. And so in the construction process of a house, it goes from simple to complex. So the fact that a particular process goes from simple to complex in no way rules out intelligent design. And it's not that because you're designing your house in consultation with other professionals, that therefore somehow the house, you have to start with the complete house and then go down to the cement foundation. So when you design things, you design them to evolve. You start with a simple thing and then you build and build until you get the complex thing. So therefore, evolution is not at all inconsistent with intelligent design.
That changes,
what's that?
Like the natural selection is not it's not natural, it's like intelligent selection.
Well, natural selection is obviously true. What's not obviously true is unguided evolution. You see, Darwin combined, there's two aspects to his theory, and neo-Darwinian theories. One is natural selection, but natural selection acting upon random mutations, as they put it. It's the mutations which are absurd, that you would get such, almost infinitely complex mutations spontaneously. That's which is just pretty idiotic. But as far as natural selection, everybody already knew that. Every farmer knows that. Every farmer knows that if you plant a row of trees, some of them are robust and strong, and some of them are weak and don't grow. Everyone knows that. It's like that idiotic example they give where there was some kind of white bird in England, and the white bird, and then with the Industrial Revolution, everything would sort of turn dark, so then the dark forms of the bird survived because they had camouflage from the all the dirt and grime of industrial London. That's not mutation. That's just, everybody already knew that. Everybody already knew for thousands of years, long before modern science, that a creature which is better adapted to its environment will survive. Everybody knew that. That wasn't a revelation.
But the argument that Sadaputa Prabhu makes in his book God
Yes.
and Science,
Yes.
which is a collection of
Yes,
several different
yes.
things, that kind of like argument that if God created the world originally and then it's playing by the rules, then he is, I forget the very cool term that Sadaputa Prabhu used, but it was something like he's just a spectator God later on, where he does not
Right.
have the power to change anything.
Well, someone could have the power, just not use the power. But actually, that's not the theory I put forward. You see, in my proposal, God is not a spectator. God comes up with an intelligent design and actually participates in the... What do you need?
Some water.
Oh yeah, we have water. Pani jal.
Yeah, we have cookies too. Oh, friends, cookies.
No, because what I'm saying is, Krishna comes up with an intelligent design, and then it evolves, but even that evolution process is guided.
That's peanut butter.
So it's not a spectator God, it's a God who's guiding the process, but he guides a process that goes from simple to complex.
I think the strongest argument that I've heard from some scientist friends is that of God being, if that's what we're saying, that God did the original creation, where science today cannot explain that itself, and some of the honest, intellectually honest scientists will admit that, they will say, okay, we will let God be the owner or be the creator, that's fine.
That's generous.
And the rest of it, we have figured it out, and here
No, actually, you haven't figured it out, because
our
what
theories
is
define
it?
that.
But what does it mean? You see, they're using the word "figured out" in a very special sense.
So-
They're not using, they're using words inconsistently, because science, as I've always understood it as a non-scientist, but I always thought is that they show necessary relationships. It's just like, let's say you're doing medical research and you're trying to find the cause of a disease and therefore the cure. You know, the idea being find the cause, you can then eliminate that cause and then you have the cure. So, science is looking for, you could say, necessary relationships, causality, and so on. So when you say you figured it out, does that mean you've shown that it was necessarily that way? Or that we've come up with an explanation which does not...
Maybe the latter.
But that's not science.
Okay.
That is a theory.
That's a theory of how it, and as
I know,
long as
but-
the theory
but-
hasn't been disproved via experimental
No,
means, it continues to hold
No,
till the
no,
point
no.
it shall be disproved.
No. That's missing the point entirely. A theory, a theory, let's say, of how the human eye, or just how the eye evolved. How the eye evolved. You have a theory, how are you going to prove it? An unprovable, because it was that Karl Popper, that philosopher of science, said that a theory has to be falsifiable. How do you falsify a theory
Oh yeah.
which talks about something that happened millions of years ago? What does it mean to falsify it? Because you could say that I believe that, whatever other evolution, I think kangaroos were actually created separately by the great pumpkin, who lives up in the sky.
Sure. But if I take a simple thing, like if I drop a ball,
Yes.
it shall hit this ground exactly at
Yes.
this time, right to the nanosecond.
But you can't do that with evolution.
Sure.
So tell me down to the nanosecond what the next mutation is.
Absolutely, that cannot be. That's very weak in scientific terms.
So therefore, to say they figured it out, all they're saying is, you see, let me translate that for you, what they're saying. Because if you say if I drop a ball and I know to nanoseconds when it's going to hit the ground, and then we do tests and repeatedly it works, yeah, then I'll let you go ahead and say you figured it out.
Yeah.
Now, when you say you figured out evolution,
No, I don't. I'm not saying.
yeah. So when they say it,
Yeah.
I'm saying, what the hell are you talking about?
Yeah.
What do you mean? What do those English words mean? When you say you figured out evolution, what are you talking about? Because what are you predicting to the nanosecond here?
Right. Yeah. So evolution is a very, very, even in scientific domain, extremely controversial and just wrought with.
It's not
issues.
a scientific fact.
Yeah.
They say that even if I say, okay, let's say we concede that, because as Siddhartha and Rudakarma pointed out, in the fossil record there are many anomalies.
Yeah. So restricting the discussion to physics
Yeah.
and let's say general relativity, quantum mechanics, and the
Yeah.
two leading theories of how nature works and all that. In that sense, there is no perceivable role of God.
Siddhartha refuted it.
If you drop a ball,
Yeah.
there has been never a single recorded experiment that God could intervene and make the ball drop with a time delay that does not mean
That's
predictable
you see,
results.
But what you just said shows how unfortunate it is that scientists don't take philosophy classes. Because when you say that if God were some type of compulsive, retarded being who just kind of like compulsively, without any will, just intervenes in certain things, but that's not what we're saying.
But we pray and we request God to intervene.
However, no serious theology would say that whenever it's not like a McDonald's drive-in booth or something where you put your order in and say, "Hey, I paid my money. Where's my cheeseburger?" It's not like that. It's not like that.
But
No serious theology says that God will or must
absolutely
just snap to it every time you offer your little prayer. So therefore, if you say that if there was a God, he would stop the ball from dropping, let's just think about that, because that's basically what you're saying. Let's look at that logically. If God exists, the triple O God of religion, omnipotent, omniscient, omnibenevolent. So if there's really a triple O God, he would, this is the argument, let's put it as a formal argument. If the traditional God exists, he will intervene and stop balls from dropping. Now, clearly that is not a valid argument.
No. May I extend the argument a little bit? And I
Yeah.
have written about it. I'm not doing this on the fly.
Okay. Yeah.
You're very busy, but I'll be happy to forward you an essay
No,
that I
go
wrote
ahead, yeah.
for someone else.
Because you did say, I mean, I
To
want to
summarize,
draw out the
brief,
point. Yeah, but
for
but
sake
what
of
you
brevity,
what you did say was there's not a recorded case of
Correct.
God intervening in a ball
Correct.
dropping event.
exactly. Let me clarify that
Yes.
a little bit. The quality of the person, and this has been proven in modern science as well with the Heisenberg's uncertainty. For us devotees, an accepted fact
Yes, famous.
by science. So that's a good thing. Okay, so I'm an observer. But the quality of the observer, if it's a great devotee of the Lord, as we would say as devotees, he could request, and so God is not an order supplier, but when a pure devotee requests God, and God is under the control of a pure devotee can request God, and then God can let me complete.
Yes.
Can alter the results. However, a different person, a demon or whoever, an atheist, God would not intervene based on his prayers. So here, not only the observer is playing a role, but his consciousness and his level of devotion is playing a role.
I understand that. No, I
And
understand your
that's
point.
where science says that that's the aspect which we want to eliminate, because there all kind of predictability goes out of the window.
No, actually,
And secondly,
yeah.
let me just one more point.
Okay,
And secondly, there may be no predictability when we talk about the Heisenberg uncertainty
Yeah.
principle, etc. There may be no predictability, for example, as to when, let's say, if you're watching the half-life and the decay process of a mass of radioactive substance, uranium, you don't know when a given atom will decay.
Right.
But at a statistical level, when you're
Yes.
talking about trillions and trillions of atoms in 1 gram of uranium, you know to the precision of a nanosecond as to when the half-life of it,
Okay.
which means half of it will decay. And so ruling out this unpredictability
No, but you're making a lot of points.
is
You're
the
ma-
aspect,
no,
is the
no,
core
but,
aspect of science.
but you're making a lot of points, practically all of which I think can be refuted
Sure.
one by one, and so I don't want to forget the first things you said. So I want to go over all the points because I think you set up an argument. I think at every step of the way there are fallacies. Every step of the way.
Okay, so just to summarize, all I talked about was making it non-dependent. What science?
No, I understand your point. No, I understand your
on the
conclusion. I understand your conclusion.
consciousness.
But I understand the conclusion. But the way you got there, I think,
And
but-
statistically, it should
I know.
the observer still does not play.
I
a
know,
role.
but okay. So let's go through this because I think there's like all kinds of logical problems throughout that
Sure.
whole thing you laid out. One is that I'll just like one thing I remember is Kali Yuga. Memory is not so good. But as far as the observer influencing the outcome, that's not generally true. It's true within a specific realm called quantum physics. But for example, of course they do say that a watched pot never boils. It's an old saying, like you keep looking at the pot, it's never going to boil the water if you're impatient. But for example, you can, let's give your example. You release a ball, right? Now I would say that whoever watches or doesn't watch has no effect on the ball. It's not that if we watch the ball, it goes up, or if we don't watch the ball, it goes down. And so therefore, the Newtonian universe, observation plays no role at all. And as far as observation playing a role in quantum mechanics, I would say to me, what that says to me personally is not just that, well, what it says to me personally is that quantum mechanics is not yet a fully developed theory. I mean, obviously it has a lot of good points, it's useful in certain realms, it's practical to use, but it's not fully developed. And that's why they can't integrate it with other forms of physics like Einstein and Newton. And the reason it can't be integrated and the reason they have this observer problem, I think, is just because it's still an immature theory. It's done a lot, but they still don't really understand what's going on. So once they really understand the quantum universe, we'll have to see whether the observer really does change it. But apart from that, as far as the scientists saying that all predictability goes out the window, false argument. I'll explain why it's a false argument. Because I think any sane person, which would kind of rule out some of these religious preachers, but I would say that, like the ones that put up billboards that says Jesus is the only way, but apart from people like that who I consider to be, I don't know what you call mentally challenged, I would say most people that believe in God, the overwhelming majority of people who believe in God, do not believe that God intervenes against the laws of nature all the time. Like, in the last 15 minutes he did 7 times. I mean, no one thinks that. No one thinks that. And so therefore, even if it's a fact that there's a God who's guiding evolution, you see, what they're assuming is, what the scientists are, there's a few problems with that claim. Number one, even if God very rarely intervened, so-called miracles or something, it would still mean that in 99.009% of the cases, God doesn't intervene, and therefore a regular science would still be extremely necessary and useful, and would actually be correct almost all the time. And so to say that, what is the use of a science that's correct almost all the time, that's kind of a stupid question. As far as and as far as God, what Sariputta shows in that book actually is that when you look at the power of science to predict, like probabilities. I mean, the example you gave, where you can't say when a particular, what was it, molecule?
Atom would decay.
What atom would decay. What that means is, what Sariputta shows mathematically in that book, is that science can be precise only to a certain degree.
Yes.
And that the space, like that area where they cannot be more precise, leaves room for God to act without violating the laws of nature.
Yes.
And so therefore, just to give an example of what you said, you could say that God intervenes. I mean, I really think Krishna has better things to do with his time. But let's say God intervened to decide when a particular atom would decay. It still wouldn't change the whole outcome. You can have the same mechanistic, you can have the same deterministic outcome, and yet God participating. And so, plus, there are so many areas of life, so many important areas in the daily life of everyone that have nothing to do with science. For example, let's say you're raising a child, and you want the child to be a good person. You want the child to have a productive life, do something with your life. Stay out of jail, whatever every parent hopes for. And so, that has nothing to do with physics. That has nothing to do with physics. And so if your child wakes up one day and says, I've decided I really do want to chant Hare Krishna, or I've decided that I really want to get better grades in school, physics can't predict that. What does that got to do with quantum mechanics? And so the universe ultimately, or the earth ultimately, is not just dead physical things. What's most important is living conscious things. And in the lives of living conscious beings, it has nothing to do with quantum mechanics. It has to do with people's inspiration or their lack of inspiration, free decisions people make with their free will. And in all those most important areas, it's not deterministic, it's free will, and therefore God is there. So let's say someone, I've experienced my own life, that by sincerely praying, Krishna has helped me in many ways. And I've seen a million times how Krishna helped me in my life. And in every one of those cases, it has nothing to do with quantum mechanics.
Yeah. So, to changing my argument myself, in the same article, Sariputta Prabhu writes that yes, it may you may be able to predict, for example, on a billiards table, if I hit a ball with a cue, exactly when it will hit the wall.
Yes.
It's kind of like the same argument
Yes.
as dropping a ball under gravity.
Yeah.
However, he says that and that ball repeatedly bounces so many times, and when let's say it's a frictionless table and it keeps bouncing 100 times, when the number gets very large, the errors, even at the molecular or the atomic level, which science today says they cannot estimate, those errors are we don't know what's happening at that micro level.
Right.
And over 100 bounces, they begin to magnify, so that even if you made the most accurate measurements with an electron microscope, your measurements would be off as to where the ball's position will be after the 100th bounce.
Right.
Putting it more simply, dropping a metal ball and when it hits the floor versus dropping a feather.
Right.
Science today cannot predict exactly when and in which position will the feather fall on the
They
ground.
can't predict the weather very well, yeah.
And weather is the next big example.
Yeah.
Because there is a interaction of trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions
So
of
they have these
molecules,
monster computers to...
which are nowhere to predicting.
Right.
If you dropped a feather from maybe 1 millimeter above the ground, they might predict it today.
Yeah.
But not from the top of a building. So yes, and
so getting back to that point you made before, it's kind of like a neurotic argument, because in Krishna consciousness, for example, are we trying to interfere with predictions, let's say, about like aeronautical science? or rockets, or microsurgeries. I mean, where are we trying to interfere? If you say that evolution is guided, it doesn't change the facts on the ground. You see, they're assuming that, let's say, in a deterministic model, let's say you were alive 500 million years ago, and you know everything you know now, or let's say you're a scientist. How would you predict where evolution was going? It's just like you say the billiard balls after 100 bounces. Well, what Siddharth Puja shows mathematically is that in the development of organisms, there's trillions of bounces. There's trillions
Absolutely,
of bounces.
yes.
And therefore, if something's really a science, you can predict where it's going. But if you say evolution was random, like the feather falling, then where's the deterministic science? And so if you say that God intervenes, somehow or other it's like all the, biologists lose their jobs, or no one's going to want to do medical research, or, it's just, to me, it's just like a completely eccentric argument.
It's like an attack on their philosophy, or on their philosophy.
I'm more interested on the physics side,
Yes.
and I totally, this biology and evolution is just a minefield wrought with just endless refutable arguments, and it's just very weak. I agree. Modern science, physics has little bit standing on a slightly better ground.
It's more mathematical.
Since it's more mathematical. So changing the discussion a little bit, what I wanted to discuss with you is that, unless you had any other questions, they're showing, I don't want to, put a chip on their shoulders, or, they're showing a huge amount of promise in terms of their abilities in mathematics, in physics, especially on, they're doing, again, I can share with you some things, like he's doing senior level classes at Reed College.
Really?
On quantum mechanics. He has already done a class on general relativity, and the professors are they like him so much, and they said, what are you going to do in college? You should just go to grad school directly. And they invited him to do some research with them. He's in fact doing a 2-year-long research project in mathematics with a professor and one of his grad students at MIT. And
Really?
they have come up with some new results.
It's like
to
that
open problems.
Good Will Hunting movie. You know that movie?
Yeah, I've heard of it.
And they're going
Oh,
to
he's like a math genius.
publish they're going to send their research work to a peer-reviewed journal for publication.
That's really good.
So with that level of, most likely it appears to me that, and the younger one is more
What are
or
their
less
names, by the way?
Gopal
Gopal?
Krishna and Ram Krishna Goyal.
Gopal Krishna?
It's like
The way we write it is Gopal, and then Krishna the middle name, and then
Right, Gopal Krishna and Ram Krishna. Good names.
yeah. When they were born, we just named him Gopal. We didn't know whether we have a next boy or a girl. And then we had a boy, and then we gave him the name Ram Krishna, and everybody gets confused that Ram should be the elder one and Gopal should be the younger one.
Oh,
Because, Ram was
not a major problem.
I said we didn't know when we had them in which order they'll. Anyway, so yeah, he's almost on the same trajectory behind him. Going into academics and going into the area of physics, let's say, how can they couple of questions here. How can they, first of all, have it very clear in their head, science versus
Like Newton, they should follow Newton.
Versus Vaishnavism?
Well, they should follow Newton
And
because
be true to both.
because it's glorifying Krishna. The more you show how the universe is logical, the more it shows the glory of Krishna, that he's created this brilliant universe. the more. So to me, I mean, Krishna is the Lord of men. The fact that God has created an infinitely rational, logical, mathematical universe, that's the glory of God. It's like a knife in the hand of a surgeon or in the hand of a killer. Newton, when he wrote his principles, he what's it?
The Principia.
Yeah, I mean, he thought he's glorifying God. Because the more you show the universe is rational, the more it's obvious that an intelligent being made it.
Though there's the other side who say that he was almost forced to glorify God, because if he didn't, he would be burned on the stake.
Well, I think the people that are really forced is the people that say that because they're forced by their own false ego to try to, because they don't want Newton to be on our side, but actually he was on our side.
Everybody's trying to get Newton on their side.
No, but the fact is that I think I'll just go with history. And what we have on our side is all of Newton's statements and the statements of his friends. And what do they have? They they think, well, it's almost like, well, no really intelligent mathematician could believe in God. They're just creeps.
I'm talking at more realistic, on the ground level. And how do we, should we like, and I'm probably speaking for you here, my life is almost over.
Really? I must be already dead.
I mean, like I have a long career behind me, and I'm thinking of retiring in the next 10 years.
I must be like a ghost hovering above you. He died 20 years ago.
So, anyway, I mean, I can't change my career. Anyway, I'm not the point. When they're, should they share openly that they believe in God and they are theistic?
They
and
should
all that?
only share,
or be more like a double
I
agent.
understand. They should only share what's in their self-interest to share.
We were speaking with Dhruta Prabhu a few years ago.
What did he say?
And he said that, he didn't answer directly the question, and I'm again not expecting a very do this answer, but he said one thing that Sadaputa Prabhu's very sad example that his PhD advisor refused to write a letter of recommendation for him to get a tenure track position in a university only because he was a Hare Krishna. He said, it seems, as Dhruta Prabhu told me directly in a one-on-one, in just like this kind of a setting, that his professor told him that if you give up Hare Krishna, I'll write, you're the best student I've ever had, I'll write a recommendation letter that will immediately get you into the position. If you don't, I'm not going to write you a recommendation letter, ever.
Yeah, but that was...
he chose the latter, and...
No, I understand. No, I wouldn't...
I mean, he still did great things.
Yeah, and even worked at a lab with the Nobel laureate at Cambridge, but... No, I would say, I agree with you to karma.
And the other angle of the argument he said is, okay, if you keep it hidden, act like a double agent, like a double spy, tell them, no, I'm, and then he said the risk that you run is that sometimes the double agent turns on to the other side. So you have to be careful that if you kind of,
I would say that
you risk them becoming atheists.
No, but you have to remember something. First of all, in those days, the movement was immature, and devotees were kind of like in your face, I'm a devotee, and the movement had a pretty awful reputation, which to our credit, we earned. And by this super zealous behavior. And so, I don't believe, that was different. That was a different time in history. That was in the late 60s, early 70s. There was a culture war going on in America. And actually, science fields were much more atheistic even than they are now. And there's a lot more...
You think they're more atheistic then than they're now? Is that what
No, they were back then.
They were more atheistic then than they're now?
Yeah.
Is that what you... Okay.
Yeah. I think now it's a different world. Plus, you have a very big advantage, and that is you have an Indian body, which if you don't believe me, just look in the mirror. And so the fact is that, the idea that someone, and nowadays everyone has to respect diversity and all that, the fact that someone from an Indian Hindu background has belongs to a religion from his family, it doesn't keep you out of it. No. I think it depends on how you deal with it. First of all,
How to do it.
yeah. First of all, when Gopal is doing science at university, it's no one's business what his religion is. See, the Hare Krishna movement back then was very in your face and in the streets and everything, and it was really kind of in attack mode. And then people pushed back. But the point, if he goes to say to a university to do math, he's not going there in the math department. He's not going there to preach. Like when I went to Harvard. I got the fastest PhD in the history of my department, and and I went there. Everyone knows a devotee. I even went there with a bead bag and everything. But I wasn't I wasn't there to preach to everybody. I was there to get a PhD. And so if he just does his work nicely and is respectful of other people and not preaching, and just the fact that when he goes home, but with his family, they have a particular family religion. I don't think anyone cares about that.
We do go to, and we plan to also accelerate our just go on Harinams on the street.
I would say that's probably not a good idea. I'll explain for the following reason. What?
I just wanted to say Princeton has a Hindu life minister, and they have all kinds of Hindu celebrations.
Yeah, the world's different now.
Yeah, it's very
But another thing is, Prabhupada. I mean, first of all,
In downtown Portland,
I think that would be
Saturday market.
Yeah, I think it would be a disaster. I'll tell you why.
Okay.
I mean, not just for your kids, but for the Hare Krishna movement.
Okay.
Not necessarily. First of all, I'm in favor of chanting Krishna's names in public. However, we should do it in a way that doesn't convince everyone that we're Martians. I mean, the point is, when devotees, I'll tell you, because I'm not giving the class down the temple, so I can just, we can speak.
Please,
openly.
please. And I'm not recording anything.
Yeah, there's a